Brilliant. Thanks, Lucy. And yeah, thanks to Elaine, who's joining us from the Arts Council today. And we're also joined by Leona Cully from the Creative Europe Desk, Ireland. So today, yeah, as Lucy said, it's the third in our series of capacity building webinars. And today we're focusing on sustainable arts projects within European applications. We will move on to the next slide. Thanks a million, Lucy. So I'm Aoife Tunney, and I'm giving you a little introduction now, and then I'll hand over to Elaine. And as Lucy said, we'll have time for questions at the end. This is going to be a short, kind of bite-size webinar, so we won't be taking up too much of your time, but just Elaine has a great presentation with up-to-date information on climate action and from the Arts Council perspective, but also looking at how you address it yourselves within your organizations and your projects. Next slide, please. Thanks. So just quickly, the Creative Europe Desk Ireland, as you're probably well aware at this stage, we have three offices. We've the Media Office, Dublin and Galway, and then we've the Culture Office, myself and Lucy, in collaboration with Leona as well. We work within the Culture Sub-Programme, and we're hosted by the Arts Council of Ireland. So when we're looking at the work we do, the next slide, thanks, Lucy. Really, it's kind of like webinars and events like this. So we're contracted to the European Commission for an annual work program. Across the year, we have different facets of the way we work. So one of them is, as I said, webinars like this. We give information, advice, and assistance, but we also build capacity within the sector for potential Irish applicants. And that's key to really getting them built up to and aware of the opportunities available for funding under the European Commission. So we promote the program at local, regional, and national level, whether that's hosting our own events or presenting at other stakeholders or other agencies or organizations. We get invited across the country to present. And we collaborate with key sectoral stakeholders and agencies across a number of ways, whether that's again our own events or on other key events throughout the year. We collaborate with our Creative Europe Desk network and increasingly are working very closely with our colleagues and the next point there, assisting with partner searches. So coming up in the next couple of weeks, there's a really great opportunity that has been hosted by a number of the desks within the Creative Europe Desk Network, and it's around matchmaking and connecting with those potential European partners. So we are always involved in that, and we will send on the information and kind of make it available to the potential applicants. We also work cross-sectorally with our partnerships on events with the Media Office. So through Leona, we make that available, any information around those events coming up. So keep your eyes out because there's always ways that these events can be helpful to you as organizations. Next slide, please, Lucy. So looking briefly at why culture is funded through the EU. So as we probably know ourselves and feel the benefits that culture has a great intrinsic value to society as a whole, and this is why it's funded within the culture programs, and that has been embedded through various commitments in treaties down through the years, but also in broader EU policy documents. So there was an original EU Agenda for Culture document in 2018, but then now we have more up-to-date version, which is the Plan for Culture 23 to 2026. Other documents, Gender Equality Strategy, the European Green Deal, which is obviously key for what we're talking about today, and then the European Framework for Action on Cultural Heritage. So all these documents feed into what the programme is, what the priorities and objectives of the programme and the different calls are. Obviously, we're not saying go out and read them all from beginning to end, but they are interesting and worth noting and being aware of for their kind of impact and their context for the program itself. And next slide, please. Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, so we're looking at how the culture is funded. So there are different ways. So the direct funding actions, European Capital of Culture, various prizes in music, architecture, literature, and heritage. And then there's the centrally administered funding program, which is the Credit of Europe program 2021 to 27 we are currently in. The next slide looks at the funding and how the budget is split. So there's 2.44 billion for this whole program. And that's split between the media sub-program, the culture sub-program, and the cross-sectoral strand. And the next slide, please. Thanks. And in general, across all of the culture calls, there are various priorities. When we came out of COVID, there was obviously a serious focus on resilience and recovery, and that has kind of continued now into the more recent times where we've had the cost of living, and then obviously various wars, unfortunately, that are taking place within Europe, that has impacted the sector. So the program is there to provide support and for resilience and recovery against that. Innovation and joint creation is looking really at how culture and cultural projects and organizations within those projects can be innovative together, which makes them very much more competitive within the European market. And then that joint creation where they're exchanging and bringing different aspects from those countries into the projects themselves. That kind of feeds into the next one, cooperation and exchange of practices, really learning to work together across borders and then exchanging those different practices within Europe is always a great priority within the program. And key players and multipliers. So this we've talked about is where a project with a partner based in Ireland works obviously internationally, but then how that project impacts and is embedded within different multipliers, different agencies within the national cohort. So it kind of has that multiplying effect with artists, other organizations, other agencies, and national funders within the project. So it has a really embedded on the ground impact, which is great for the sector. And the capacity building of artists, that's very obvious how the artists themselves, their professional development, how that is built up within these projects. And our next slide. Thanks. So, overarching priorities. In the last program, you'll be aware that the applications themselves talked about priorities, but they weren't overarching, and you could select which ones you wanted to address. For this call and this application, you must address all of these four priorities here. And today, we're obviously focusing on the sustainability there, number two. Creative Europe's contribution to the EU greening efforts and the European Green Deal. So this is something that you must address. So this is why we're undertaking these capacity building events and webinars to give you the kind of tools and give you the information to look at these, to start addressing or continue the work you're doing in this area already. And the next slide, please. Thanks, Lucy. So just to look directly at where it is in the application form. So there is a part A. Once you've set up, many might have set up their portal, their account already, and have registered, and they've seen the application form and the document. So this is one of the parts, 1.4 in the application form itself, and it's describing the overall approaches to tackle the following EU overarching priorities as set out in the call document. Again, we always say to go back to the call document, the most up-to-date version, which will have more expanded information on these listed priorities. So we're looking at the Creative Europe contribution to the EU greening efforts and explain what in the project design and its implementation will specifically contribute to them. So you're thinking through the project design and its implementation, but you're also thinking about how you're working as an organization and as a partnership. And the next slide, I think, just kind of says that, yeah, so the project design, the implementation, and then the partners need to look at their adapting to their company strategy, their project strategy, and the activities within the content of the project. So it's really a kind of overarching approach, how it addresses the climate action and your activities, but within the project and the organization itself. Um, and then I think it's where I'm going to hand over to Elaine on the next slide. Um, yeah, we'll come back to this because there's actually an event that's kind of key to that project itself there. So I'm going to hand over without further ado to Elaine, and thanks.
Perfect. Just to check that's sharing for everyone.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Right, okay. So hi everyone, and thank you all so much for having me come along here today. So I have a few slides that I'm going to go through. But just I suppose firstly to introduce myself firstly. So I'm Elaine Doyle. I'm a program delivery manager for the Arts Council. I work in our strategic development department and I'm currently looking after two areas of digital arts and climate action. So I've been with the Arts Council coming on 2 years now, and prior to joining, I worked in a small environmental and geolocation company for just under 6 years. So I was working on environmental assessments and advisory services for a number of public bodies, primarily agriculture, but also touching on areas such as heritage, forestry, and housing. So, just to set a very brief context, as we all know, the climate and nature crisis is the biggest challenge facing us all, and the arts are increasingly being recognised as a resource for transformative change across all levels. And the arts, really have a unique ability in that they can bring connection, creativity, and different voices and perspectives to the solutions that we so desperately need. And there's a lot being done in terms of climate action already by the sector, but I suppose what has been lacking up until this point is the frameworks and funding to support and unlock what the arts have to offer. Um, and the Arts Council does recognise the central role that it needs to play both as a public body in terms of delivering our own national climate objectives, but also in terms of helping to support the arts sector to adapt to this change and also our role in advocating and helping to position the arts at the forefront of climate action. So our parent department, who are now the Department of Arts, Culture, Communications, Media and Sport, it's still a mouthful, but they will be launching a national framework on culture, creativity and climate shortly. And the Arts Council will be a key supporting pillar of this framework, and we will launch our statement of policy or intent, which will be aligned to this once their framework is launched. In the meantime, we have published a climate action roadmap for both 2023 and 2024. Our one for 2025 will soon be available, and it's publicly available on our website. It outlines our corporate climate action commitments, planned actions, and the status of these actions. Um, just for transparency to show that we are working internally towards the government's 2030 carbon and energy efficiency targets. And I suppose it's also worth mentioning the Arts Council is currently drafting its next strategy, and climate will be identified as a key strategic priority in this. So just to, I suppose, have a little look at what we've done so far in terms of developing climate action sector support. So we've started with our regularly funded bodies and we hope to expand out further over the next while. So we're working with a consortium of Julie's Bicycle Native Events and the Green Arts Initiative, which many of you are probably well aware of and are probably engaged with. So they're acting as climate advisors to the Arts Council currently. They've also they've really helped us to have a very comprehensive engagement and support program with our art centres and strategically funded organisations. As this March, they are required to submit an organisational climate action policy as a condition of their funding for the first time. So whilst we started here, all resources from this engagement and support program are being shared on our website. So they're available for the wider arts sector and population. And I'll talk through these in a little bit towards the end. And in terms of, support moving forward, we plan to work more closely with resource organisations to support sector convening in particular, to research and support a model to provide resources for venues, festivals, touring, production and public engagement. And we also hope to establish a arts climate ambassador programme. So we did a lot of consultation in the run up to this engagement program. We had a lot of direct engagement with the sector, and what really came back was that in regards to training and supports, what was needed was practical resources on how to take action, clear guidance on developing policies and plans, peer-to-peer knowledge sharing and best practice examples. Um, there's a clear recognition in the sector that there's many who already are really leading the way. And finally, that the training and supports are tailored to different types of activities. So I suppose just to briefly take you through some guidance in terms of starting your own climate action journey or greening your art practice. So you can find these steps in a two-pager on our website, which was developed by the Green Arts Initiative. So the first is to not do it alone. So begin by bringing people together, because addressing climate change collaboratively is both more rewarding and more productive. It will also allow you to get a sense of where others are at on their greening journey, which in itself can help with a sense of collegiality. You could look at doing this by bringing people in an organisation together, or maybe by gathering artists living near you, or those who work in a similar space or have a similar practice. It could be done through a network or a membership organisation you're involved with either, or maybe tapping into your local community and getting others involved in the arts in your locality. And the point of this really is to discuss climate change, to discuss what actions are being taken, how it impacts you and the work that you do, what actions you'd like to take, whether that be, mitigation or adaptation, and also to help identify, obstacles to action and discuss how you might be able to remove it, or what needs to be done and able to remove this. And it's always good to remember that change doesn't happen without people. I know this because it's a trap I've fallen into in the past, and it's very difficult for any real change to be achieved if there's only one or a few banging the drum. So when you're getting started, it's definitely worthwhile spending a bit of time at the beginning to think about who needs to be involved and how do they need to be involved, and conducting a stakeholder mapping exercise. So you'll want to be thinking about how to bring people together, whose support and buy-in you really need for this change to happen. So think of, who needs to be actively involved, how they will be involved, how much time it will take, do they have any particular support or training needs in order to achieve what you want to achieve. It's also worthwhile spending some time thinking about how are you going to do a broader communication and engagement, whether that be internally or with key partners, collaborators, funders. And the benefits, I suppose, of spending the time at the beginning to do this is that you create a sense of trust, which in itself will help to create a buy-in, and that buy-in helps with the credibility. It also helps give a sense of ownership, to know that you have the ability to affect change, and also means that you can ensure your climate action goals and objectives align to those of your organisation or art practice. And that in itself will, help to give a consistency of approach, and really, look, overall, having collaboration will lead to better results. So the next step then is really to identify your key impact areas and measure these. It's true for any sector, and most certainly the arts sector. There really is no one size fits all approach. Each and every organisation and artist is different, and as a result, they will likely have different key impacts. So often the key impact areas are specific to the type of activity or organisation that you are. So whether that be maybe a building-based organisation, your key impacts may be energy or water, procurement might be very important. If it's a festival, travel is going to be definitely one of your key impacts. Energy might be important, but waste and materials will also be another key area. For resource organisations, again, it's travel, it's procurement, and also maybe support for artists might be a key area of concern and impact. Then production and touring, obviously travel, transport, accommodation, they're all going to be key areas. And And then for individual artists, your key impact areas are probably likely to vary. It may be travel, you might do a lot of travel in your work. It could be the energy that's embedded in the materials that you use, or maybe the energy that you use in your studio. Um, so I suppose why is it important to identify and measure your key impacts? There's a number of benefits, and I suppose the first is that it will really help you to identify your priorities. I think it can be overwhelming if you try to tackle everything all at once. Um, but I think by identifying your key impact areas, it helps you to focus on the areas that you have the most impact and control over yourselves. It will help you set targets, inform the actions to be taken, and will help you to track the progress you've made. And it also helps you to tell your story and demonstrate to funders and audiences good practice, and might even hopefully help inspire others. And yeah, I think this slide kind of sums it all up well. So you want to start with the impacts you have identified, given who you are, what you do, where you are, and with who. Um, then you think about which impacts you want to understand more about, starting with those which you have the most control over. The next step then is to identify what data and information you already have or that you can easily get. Don't overcomplicate it. So, start with your energy, water, and waste bills. Maybe you have staff or personal travel records easily to hand, or, you might even have audience travel information. Or a supplier or host venue's environmental credentials might be easy to come across. Then think about how to build a wider picture after this. You can perhaps find out what people think, whether that be a team member, audiences, freelancers, and find out what others are doing as well. Reach out to peers or a community group, get in touch with your local arts officer. And then finally is to use the data and information you have to identify priorities and set objectives and targets. So this will mean that you have informed actions which you can track progress against. And it's also vital, I suppose, to identify where are your gaps and where you might need more training and support. And then finally is to tell your story. And I suppose it's always worth remembering the story doesn't have to be complete. So, as I mentioned on the last slide, one of the easiest places is to start with your bills. So, you can take your electricity and heating usage, your water and waste usage information, all from your bills and invoices. And this can really help inform where your largest impact areas are. We have a really simple Excel template for this on the climate action section of our website under resource and support section. And yeah, understanding your bills and usage is one of the best places to start. There's a multitude of other calculators and tools out there as well. And you can adapt the likes of the template that we have to suit your practice, or any other template that you find. Because, you might have additional information that you want to record, maybe work journeys or accommodation booked. So yeah, once you have a better understanding of what your key impact areas are, the third step then is really to commit to reducing your environmental impact. So you can do this by setting yourself and your organization targets and deadlines. We would always say to be ambitious as you can, but more importantly is to be realistic. A lot of time and energy can be wasted in trying to achieve something which is, just out of scope or out of reach for whatever reason. But you may have been able to achieve two or three smaller things in that time. Energy is generally the key area for greenhouse gas emission reduction. So if you're looking organizationally or personally at getting your carbon footprint down, that's the first place to really start. Electricity is generally easier than heating to tackle first. I think there's often a lot of focus on waste. It's probably because it feels like one of the easiest areas to start. It's worth mentioning, I suppose, that if your primary focus is your carbon footprint, then waste has a much lower greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. But with that being said, it absolutely should not be ignored, as it does have a really high ecological impact. So the final step I have here is to start you on your journey is to formalize your commitment, whether that be through a policy or plan, or maybe identifying climate action as an organizational strategic priority. It may be a statement of intent or commitment or personal vision and mission statement. Whichever it is, be clear and unequivocal in your commitment. And again, I suppose to go back to my earlier point, really try to ensure that whatever way you put your commitment together, that it's appropriate for the size, scale, and type of organization or practice that you are. Your commitment should be based on, who you are, where you are, what you do, who you do it with, what you value, and what do you want to see change. So this is where, I probably avoid using the likes of ChatGPT or any other type of AI to write this for you because, that's where you're going to get something broad and generic and ultimately probably not going to work for you. Yeah, so this, I suppose I just wanted to include this slide as a cautionary note. So there is always a lot of talk about carbon footprint, which, is essentially just a greenhouse gas emissions inventory for your organization or your venue or your event, whatever it might be. And it's absolutely a really, really valuable and useful way to understand your impact and to track progress and inform action. Um, but just to note, it doesn't always tell the full story. Footprints reveal what your impact is, but not exactly why. It is a worthwhile exercise to analyze and try to better understand what lies behind this to get the full story. So I suppose just to give a few examples, you could have say 40-ton decrease in waste from last year. But if you were to dig deeper, maybe the recycling percentage of your waste has dropped. Or, there could be 150 tons CO2 from energy use. And maybe this actually reflects a 5% increase from last year. So, you might be feeling a bit disheartened by this. But if you maybe look behind it, you might find that, well, actually, our organization changed our opening hours. So that increase was to be expected. Um, and sometimes you can also see a reduction in your carbon footprint unintentionally because the percentage of renewables in the grid um, has been increased. So it's just always worthwhile to think beyond carbon data as well. Consider waste volumes, recycling levels, and sustainability credentials of suppliers, ethical sponsorship, engagement in general. Changes to all these things can have a huge impact on, biodiversity, ecology, and society overall. So then just have this slide on Covey's model of control, influence, and concern. So the idea of this is to focus primarily on what is within your control. Again, sometimes you may have, no control over your heating system or your electricity supplier if you're in a rented building, for example. But you may actually have control over your electricity usage. Always start with those impacts that you can control and that you can measure. Um, then you can focus on those that you might have influence over. So again, for instance, maybe you don't control your heating system, but you may be able to engage with your landlord and help to influence them to change the hours that the heating's on, for example. And finally, it's to note that which is of concern, but that you don't have any control or influence over. Yeah, there's a number of different ways that you can make a positive difference. It could be through practical actions, so whether that's traveling less, looking to save energy, switching off, light switches at the end of the day, using public transport, sourcing sustainable materials, or even making green spaces. You can also inform and inspire change by raising awareness, or helping to influence behavior changes, or maybe even through programming and storytelling, um, or helping to support the sector would be another way to inform and inspire change. And then when looking to drive wider change, that might be through collaboration and advocacy, collective action, looking at those collective solutions, or even through things like divestment. Yeah, so if we maybe take travel as an example to briefly work through and using Covey's model of control, influence, and concern. You might decide as an organization that you're going to create a travel policy for your own team or wider organization, um, which is going to prioritize public transport for business travel in Ireland. This is something that you have control over. And you may decide to include in that policy that, any internal flights, whether it be for a staff member or an invited artist or associate, you're not going to reimburse the expense of that. So again, there's some level of control here. You might decide that you're going to invite or encourage artists traveling to and from the UK to take part of their journey by land and sea. And you might need to state that you're going to allow for that additional time, building that time in that it takes to make that journey. So here, I suppose you have a mixture of control and influence, as maybe the artist could choose to travel, from Dublin to Cork via a flight, but they won't be reimbursed for that journey. But if they took a bus or a train, they would be. And you could invite and encourage your audiences to travel to your event by public transport. Um, and even make it easy for them by ensuring to provide all the details of what public transport is available nearby. But ultimately, you have no control over this, but you do have the potential to influence. And then there's things you have no control over and probably little influence. But you can still absolutely indicate that it's an issue or an area of concern to you and your organization. So again, using travel as an example, if you wanted to improve cycle lanes and have secure public bike parking provided by your local authority, you can make representations and garner the supports from others too. But ultimately, you might have little control and little influence here, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't express that this is an area of concern. So that's really all for me today. But I suppose before I hand back over to Aoife, I just wanted to draw your attention to the climate action section of the Arts Council website, because we have a number of resources there that you might find useful, a number of links even to other government resources that are available. So there's some specific resources and supports that we've developed. There's, a list of government funding, tools for measuring impact. You can also find our climate action roadmap there that I mentioned earlier. And yeah, if you do want a bit of further support, then definitely have a look at the resources and support section on our website. Because over the last year, we've really built up a useful hub. So you'll be able to find a number of webinars and slides, uh, as well as a lot of supporting material. So, we've done an introductory workshop and we've done one on where to start that will go into a lot more detail than I have today. Similarly, there's one specifically on getting people on board, which will again give you a lot more detail. There's ones for developing action plans for those who have public-facing buildings, another one for those who are in office-based organisations and production companies. And then there's further topic-specific webinars again, so measuring your impact, nature and biodiversity, energy, materials and procurement, audience, travel and transport, content and communications, and climate adaptation. So these can all be found on our climate action section of our website. And there was also a series of webinars which Julie's Bicycle developed, which are specifically for festivals. So yeah, we're currently working with Julie's Bicycle EU to combine and hopefully somewhat condense all of this information into a Climate Action 101 guide, which will launch then later this year. And hopefully that will then act as a one-stop shop. So do keep an eye on our website anyways, because we will upload any materials we can from there. So yeah, that's all from me. So just to say thank you again for having me here today, and hopefully it's been somewhat helpful. My email is here, and myself and our climate advisors would be happy to assist in any way that we can. So yeah, thanks again. And I suppose if there's any questions, we'll probably take them in a few minutes once the recording ends. So I'll hand back over to Aoife and Lucy.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks a million, Sarah McCameron was on. Yeah, thank you, Elaine. That was really great as usual, full of really useful information and obviously those resources there as well on the Arts Council website. Um, yeah, just to talk from a European perspective, that there's a new European project from the Creative Europe programme with an Irish partner called Westbic. The project is Creasus, and it's offering an opportunity for organizations to integrate sustainability into their business models, looking at social and environmental impact and governance aspects. So you can, at the end, yeah, Leonie's put up the link there. You can register to be part of that. It's a pilot project, but it sounds like it's got really great beneficial resources for you as an organization within that European, and it's great to see it's an Irish partner as part of it. On the next slide, I think we have there's Elaine, the upcoming events. So yeah, for our next, there's the session for the Creasus information session on March the 4th. So you can click in there and log in or register. We've got another capacity building, the next session for effective communication and dissemination. That's with Catherine Griffin, and that's next Thursday. So you can register for that one. And then think on the next page, we also have a matchmaking for EU partners. We've put this up, Leona has put this up on our website, and I think it's going to be disseminated through our newsletter. But here it is here that you can register to pitch your project as part of this desk network with obviously other potential partners there as well. And you can register there by the 6th of March to actually pitch your project, but you can also register to be an observer and just attend. And that's by the 12th of March. I think that's a really amazing opportunity. I know some of the desks involved are Portugal, Spain, Norway, Croatia, and a few other desks. So there'll be partners from those countries there as attendees, but also pitching. So yeah, if you're interested and you haven't confirmed your partners, definitely register for that. I think we'll finish up and take the questions then, Leona.